Thank you for taking the time to watch my video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up, as that will help grow my channel. If you'd like to subscribe, I'd appreciate that as well. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave those and I will respond. Again, thank you. This week we're going to turn a bowl out of maple. This bowl has already been rough turned and is actually drying. Been drying for years. This bowl blank was a gift to me. I'll explain that later. But what you see here is I've gone ahead and glued the bowl blank onto a waste block with hot melt glue. I put hot melt glue in a frying pan, melt it, and then dip both the waste block and the bottom of the bowl into the glue, and then put the two pieces together. As it turns, you can see that the bowl started out fairly out of round, which is normal. It would have been round when it was first turned, but as it dries, it will shrink more in one direction than the other and will go out of round. That's why you leave it a little bit thicker. And then once I've mounted it on the lathe, I'll turn it down and make it round again. Here I'm just using the tip of my bowl gouge. Normally, if I was doing a push cut, riding the bevel of the tool, I'd want to start at the bottom and work my way up. That way the cut is always supported by the wood behind it. But in this case, I'm just using the tip just to take off the high spots to get it round to start with. Now I've switched to my carbide tool. Carbide tools are very good at removing a lot of wood, but it really depends on the condition of the wood at the time and the type of cut you're making. Here, now that I've knocked off the highest spots and it's starting to get fairly round, the carbide tool seems to be a good option to just continue to make it a little bit rounder. And usually I'll experiment with one versus the other because sometimes one tool will cut better than the other. Again, depending on the wood and the orientation at the time, will determine which tool I use and determine which one gives me the best surface. At this point, as you can see, I'm almost round. 3/4 of the way around, I'm now touching wood. So I'm going to switch again from my carbide tool back to my bowl gouge. But this time I'm going to present the bowl gouge in slightly different fashion, not just cutting with a tip, but riding the bevel and doing what's called a push cut. Again, probably the most effective way to remove a lot of material, and also generally gives me the best finish. I know I mentioned this earlier, but normally especially on a push cut, I'll start at the bottom of the bowl and come up. You always want to have wood behind the cut to support it to give you the best surface. And here you see I'm actually going what looks like I may be going downhill. That's not really the case. At this point, the very top of the bowl is pretty flat, pretty straight, so it really doesn't make much difference until I get to this transition point right here, and then I'll switch to the bottom and work my way up. People often ask me how long it takes to turn a bowl, so this section of video was actually done in real time. So you can see how quickly or slowly, depending on your point of view, it takes to turn the outside of the bowl. Later on, the rest of the video will be at 2 times, just to shorten the overall length of the video down. The total time start to finish on the bowl was 2 hours. And that includes the finishing. Off camera, I continue to make the bowl round, and at this point you can see I'm pretty well the shape that I would like to be, and I've now switched to my negative rake scraper. Negative rake scraper also does a good job at removing a lot of wood, but this also gives you even a smoother finish most of the time, better than what I'd get off my bowl gouge. So I do like to use this, especially as I get close to the final shape. And at this point, the video is at 2x speed. Again, I am breaking the rules that I told you earlier, but I switched back to my bowl gouge right here at the top just because I had a bit of tear out, and removing that much material to get rid of that tear out would have taken a long time with the scraper, so now I've moved back to the bowl gouge. Here, even though I'm using my bowl gouge, I'm not doing the cuts that I've been describing before as a push cut. Here what I'm doing is I've turned my bowl gouge over on its side, and I'm using the side of the bowl gouge, side of the flute, as a scraper, and coming up the bowl. And that does a good job at giving me a smooth surface. Once you get your bowl to shape, then it's all about just working that surface to get the finest surface that you can. I usually like to spend a little bit more time at this stage so that the smoother the surface, the less sanding that I have to do, because I really don't like sanding. This is the first time I've used this tool in this video. This is my skew chisel. I use my skew chisel just to help form the foot. It's a scraper by nature, but it also helps you cut in a nice straight edge to give me that crisp, clean line at the bottom of the bowl, again when I'm creating the foot. So now the sanding begins. I start off here with 80 grit, just some 80 grit sheet paper, and then later on I'll switch to power sanding and work my way through the grits. Sometimes after I've started sanding, it makes it easier to see other imperfections in the surface. In this case, there was just a little bit of fine tear out. So again, I switched back to my tool just to remove a little bit more wood, just to reduce the amount of sanding. After I've started sanding, again, I notice still a tiny bit of tear out, which is hard to sand. So what I'll do here, you can see I put on sanding sealer. Sanding sealer just tends to stiffen the wood up and make it a little bit harder, which makes it easier to sand. Now the power sanding begins. When I'm power sanding, I start at 120 grit and work my way up through 600. Once I've sanded to 600 grit, then I just rub it down with some denatured alcohol. That just helps remove any sawdust that may be in the grains of the wood, just to clean it up. The surface is really starting to develop some gloss now, and although there is one little scratch right here, I removed that off camera with just a little bit more sanding before advancing to my abrasive paste. Once I've sanded up to 600 grit, next I switch to my homemade abrasive paste. If you're interested in how I made this, you can go back and look in my channel and you'll see a video on this. This ends up bringing me up to about 1,000 grit. When using the abrasive paste, what you want to do is apply it rub it in, let it work a bit, and then start switching to clean spots on the paper towel and keep rubbing it until the paper towel is clean, which makes sure that you've removed all the abrasive paste. Now you can really see the gloss starting to develop. The bowl is actually a wavy or a tiger stripe maple. You can see these stripes here and it makes for a beautiful wood. The other thing that you notice if you look closely, it's got something called chatoyance. Chatoyance is just a word, a French word meaning cat's eyes, but it's that shiny wood appearance. It's almost three-dimensional in nature. When you turn the bowl, the light catches it just a certain way and really starts to shimmer and again almost look three-dimensional. Now I switch to my polishing paste. Again, you can see the video on how that was made as well. But this just applies that final gloss and it's mostly a wax-based product. Now I switch to finishing the inside of the bowl. When I'm going to turn the inside of the bowl, there's two areas that take a little bit extra precaution and also a little bit nerve-wracking. That's your first cut in picking up the inside, establishing the rim, and also when you change from the side of the bowl to the bottom of the bowl. These are two areas that you have to be especially careful, go slow, and just pay special attention to how you're holding your tool to avoid a catch. Here I am working the bottom with what is called a pull cut. So I start at the center and I pull my tool towards the outside. This is an effective way to work on the bottom of the bowl. Since at this point the outside of the bowl is already shaped, as I'm working the inside, I'm frequently checking it for thickness to make sure that it's the right thickness and that the edges are parallel to the outer shape of the bowl. This was a spot that I mentioned earlier, the transition from the side of the bowl to the bottom of the bowl. At this point, you have to be very careful that you don't get a catch. The way to prevent that is to make sure that the cutting line of your tool is above the center line of the bowl. So if I were to draw a line from the center of the bowl out to the rim, I want to make sure that I'm above that with the tip of the tool. If at any point I dip down below, then that's when I can get a catch. Also, just in rotating the tool, if the wings on the edge of the bevel of the gouge catch the wood, that can result in a catch as well. When you're working the very bottom of the bowl, there tends to be a little nib there. At this point, you've got to be very careful. You don't want to push too hard coming into that center. Otherwise, you can rip that little nib off, which makes an indent. You also don't want it to be sticking up any, so you've got to be careful. The other thing is to keep in mind when you're working the very center of the bowl, that part of the bowl is not turning very fast. Obviously, the speed increases as you go out towards the rim, so that very center of the bowl is actually turning quite slow. Again, as I did on the outside of the bowl, once I get close to the final thickness, I'll switch to my negative rake scraper. With this, I can just make one sweeping motion right from the center, work my way across the bottom and up the side of the bowl, and that tends to give me a nice smooth surface without any ridges. The process for sanding the inside is the exact same as the outside, again starting with 80 grit, working my way up to 600. I've applied my polishing paste and my abrasive paste the same as I did on the outside. Here I'm applying my OB Shine Juice, which is a friction polish. I apply it to the paper towel and then rub it into the wood and generate some heat. I usually put about 5 coats of the OB Shine Juice on top of the polishing paste. This was a special project. It was an honor to do. A friend of mine had told me he had some wood, some bowls that were partially turned. Turns out it was his father's, and his father had passed away, and he'd gotten the wood. So his father was Dean Smith, and I got the bowls. They were rough turned. Saw that at the beginning of this video. I was able to finish these up, and I'm going to give them back to the son as a special gift. But the bowl turned out quite nice. It's beautiful wood. It's maple, and it's got a lot of figuring in it. This is wavy maple, and you can see it there hopefully. But it turned out very beautiful. Nice piece of wood, and it's again such an honor to be able to do this and give it back as a gift to the son of the man who originally started to turn it.